My name is Harold Stanley, and I am 82 years old. I've spent most of my life in the same brick house on the edge of Pittsburgh, where the birds still nest in the eaves and the maple trees out front turn the brightest amber each October. This house is older than my youngest grandchild. It was built with hands that ached at night and knees that stiffened in the cold, built board by board across 4 decades of marriage. When I walk through its rooms, I can still hear the echoes of my late wife, Dorothy. Her voice humming over the sound of the washing machine, her laugh from the kitchen when something burned and she tried to blame the oven. She passed away 7 years ago, in the dead of winter. One morning when the air was so still, I remember thinking, even the world had paused to acknowledge the end of something sacred. They said it was her heart. It had simply stopped, as if it, too, had finally grown tired. Since then, the silence in this house has settled like dust, quiet and persistent. I do what I can. I tend the backyard garden she loved so much, though the roses haven't bloomed properly since she left. I cook simple meals, mostly boiled potatoes and vegetables, and I still sit at the head of the dining table, facing the empty chair where Dorothy used to be. My son Tom says I should move out. He says the house is too much for someone my age, that I should consider assisted living, which he says like it's a mercy, not a sentence. He's a financial planner, or wealth architect, as his business card boasts, which I find both pompous and vaguely ridiculous. I understand his concern on the surface. I limp when I walk now. The stairs tire me. I forget where I leave my reading glasses sometimes. But my mind is clear. My heart still aches in precise, familiar rhythms. I still write checks. I still remember the year we refinanced the mortgage and the name of the clerk who helped us. I am not, as Tom sometimes seems to suggest, a dying houseplant that needs to be relocated to a sunny windowsill. Still, he brings it up constantly. The calls start pleasantly enough. "How are you, Dad?" Or, "Did you see the game last night?" But always end with some variation of, "It's time to let the house go." It's not practical anymore. His wife, Celeste, rarely speaks during these visits, but when she does, it's with that voice adults use with small children. Slow, artificially gentle, each word weighted down with assumed superiority. "You must be so tired taking care of this place all by yourself." She cooed once, her eyes already darting around the living room as though measuring the space for resale. I do get tired, yes, but it is the kind of tired that comes from memory, from grief, from the steady weight of days. It is not the kind of tired that makes me ready to surrender everything I've built to people who barely visit unless there's paperwork to sign. I see them, Tom, Celeste, my 2 grandkids, maybe twice a year now. Usually Thanksgiving and one summer weekend if someone remembers. They sit stiffly on the same couch Dorothy once stretched across during rainy afternoons. They sip their drinks and ask polite questions about my health, and I answer as honestly as I can without revealing the creeping fear that sometimes, in the middle of the night, I forget what Dorothy's voice sounded like. The grandkids, Austin and Bree, are teenagers now, glued to their phones, smiling at me out of obligation. I used to hold them when they were infants, singing old folk songs into their soft little ears. I wonder if they remember. I wonder if they care. Lately, Tom has grown more insistent. A few months ago, he came over with a man in a blazer who looked around my home like he was already picturing it, gutted and staged for an open house. He's just here to help us assess options, Tom said. But I could see the truth. They see the house as dead capital, a forgotten corner of their future inheritance. I see it as the only place that still carries the full weight of who I am. The back porch where I read books to Dorothy in the summers, the kitchen counter she chipped trying to open a wine bottle without a corkscrew, the tiny crack in the hallway wall from when I tried to hang her favorite painting without using the stud. These aren't flaws, they're footprints, They're reminders that we lived here fully and without apology. After that visit, I started locking the front door even when I was home. I started keeping copies of all my documents in a locked cabinet and writing down phone calls in a little red notebook, just in case. I'm not paranoid. I'm prepared. I've seen enough families torn apart by money to know how quickly love can rot when assets are at stake. I never thought it would happen in mine, but then again, I never thought my son would look me in the eye and say, "Dad, you don't really need this house anymore, do you?" As though ownership were a matter of physical endurance, not memory, not meaning. He said I was too old to own property. That phrase, "too old to own property," looped in my head for days. What does that even mean? Is there an expiration date now on dignity? A shelf life on autonomy? I built this house when I had nothing but calluses and dreams. I stayed up late doing electrical work with a flashlight between my teeth. I paid off the mortgage by clipping coupons and skipping vacations. And now, because I don't jog 5 miles a day or drive a new car, I'm supposed to sign it away like a confused tenant being evicted by the flow of time? I don't think so. There's something you learn when you've outlived half the people you loved. You learn that loss doesn't soften the world. It sharpens it. It shows you who's watching you fade and who's actively helping you disappear. I may be old, but I am not gone yet. And as for the house, they'll learn soon enough. Because what I did with the deed will change everything. It started with a clipboard and a plastic smile. One Saturday morning, I opened the door to find Tom standing beside a man in a crisp shirt and tie who introduced himself as Zach from Estate Solutions, though he said it with the cadence of someone reciting a name for the 100th time. Tom grinned like a salesman too pleased with his own pitch. "Dad, we're just exploring possibilities," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Zach followed, already scanning the house like he was cataloguing it in his mind. Square footage, natural lighting, resale potential. He commented on the original character of the wood paneling, which I knew was code for needs updating. Tom said they were looking into maximizing the home's market value before it declines any further, which sounded like I was a leaking roof or a bad water heater. I stood in the middle of the living room, hands in my pockets, trying not to show how hard my heart was pounding. They walked through the house together as if I weren't there, making notes on a clipboard, speaking in hushed tones that barely masked their excitement. I caught snippets, great layout, flip potential, hot market, and Tom nodding like this had all been settled. I didn't say much. I couldn't. I was afraid that if I opened my mouth, what would come out wouldn't be words but a howl of betrayal. Tom had mentioned selling the house before, but never like this, never with some broker already measuring the walls. At one point, Zach asked me, almost casually, if I'd ever considered moving to a senior community. Some of them have amazing social programs these days, Mr. Stanley. Movie nights, shared dinners. You might really enjoy it. He smiled as if he had just handed me a gift. I said nothing. I just looked at him, and something in my stare must have registered because he quickly excused himself to check the basement layout. When Tom and I were alone again, he finally got to the point. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where he used to eat peanut butter sandwiches after school and tell me about his spelling tests. His voice was calm, rehearsed. "Dad, you know we're only thinking about what's best for you. You're in this house alone. It's too much. It's not safe. What if you fall? What if something happens and no one finds out for days?" He leaned forward. "I've already spoken with a few buyers. Interest is high. If we act fast, we can get you a good place at Fairview Residence and still have enough left over to put some money aside for your care." I stared at him, trying to process what he'd just said. Fairview Residence? That was a facility. A clean, quiet, managed facility where people were slowly forgotten. He kept talking, faster now, like someone who knew he had to say everything before I could stop him. Look, I've already drafted some of the paperwork. It's all standard. Just transfer of ownership and temporary power of attorney so I can handle the details. It's easier if I sign for you while we get the timing right. You wouldn't need to deal with the headaches. We'd take care of everything. And then he pulled out a manila envelope. Just like that. Slid it across the table like it was a birthday card. If you want, we can go over it together. You can take a few days to think. No pressure. I didn't touch the envelope. I just looked at it. I remember thinking how heavy it suddenly felt in the room, how those papers, whatever they said, carried the weight of everything Dorothy and I had built. Not just a house, but a life, a home where we raised a son who now sat across from me, speaking in the language of transactions. I told him I'd think about it. He smiled and said that was fine, that he was proud of me for being open-minded. And he left, humming as he went out the door. But the moment it closed behind him, I picked up the envelope, walked to the kitchen, and slid it into the freezer behind the bag of frozen peas. I didn't want it near me. I didn't want its presence in my home. I stood there for a long time, hands shaking, staring at that door. I realized then what had changed. Tom wasn't asking anymore. He was assuming. He had already decided. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Dorothy's face in the hallway, hearing her voice in the garden. She would have known what to do. She always had a clarity I lacked when it came to people. She used to say, "Tom has your ambition, but none of your fear. That's dangerous." I didn't understand it back then. Now I did. He wasn't trying to help me. He was trying to eliminate an obstacle. I was no longer a person to him. I was a complication in a financial equation. I was the line item standing between him and a liquidity event. The next day I called an old friend of mine, Alan Becker, a retired lawyer who'd helped me with Dorothy's will. I asked if he had time for coffee. When I arrived at the diner, he looked up from his crossword and saw something in my face that made him fold the paper instantly. "What's going on, Harold?" I slid the envelope across the table. He opened it, brows furrowing as he read through the dense legalese. After about 10 minutes, he leaned back and exhaled sharply. "Jesus," he said. "He's trying to get you to sign a full transfer of title and durable power of attorney in one go. If you signed this, he could sell the house without asking you, take the money, and legally move you into a facility without your consent." I stared at him. "And you'd have no legal recourse," he added. "Because you'd have signed it all away." I felt something rupture inside me, not pain, not sadness, something colder, a severing. "What can I do?" I asked. Alan looked at me for a long moment. "First, don't sign a damn thing. Second, you need to put some protections in place. Have you considered creating a trust? One that holds the house in your name with specific terms of transfer after your death?" I shook my head. "Let's do that," he said, pulling out a pen. "And, Harold, don't tell Tom a thing. Let him keep thinking you're the old man who doesn't read the fine print." That was the moment everything shifted. I went from being the prey to preparing my defense. I would protect what was mine, not out of spite, not out of vengeance, but out of principle. I wasn't going to let my son sell off my life like used furniture. I wasn't going to let him turn the last chapter of my story into a transaction. He thought he could corner me with legal documents and soft threats. He didn't realize that old doesn't mean powerless, it means patient. And patient men, when pushed, can become precise. I went home that afternoon and pulled the envelope from the freezer. I set it on fire in the backyard grill, watched it curl into ash, and felt something almost like peace settle in my chest. Tom thought I was too old to own property, but he'd soon find out that I was still sharp enough to rewrite the ending. And when the time came, it wouldn't be me signing papers in confusion. It would be him, staring at a deed he didn't know I'd changed. For the next few weeks, I played the role Tom expected of me. I answered his phone calls with polite confusion, allowed him to remind me of doctor's appointments I'd never missed, listened patiently while he repeated anecdotes about my forgetfulness, as if they were family lore instead of fabrications. I let him believe he was managing me, guiding me gently toward what he imagined was a merciful conclusion: the sale of the house, the signing over of assets, the orderly surrender of autonomy. But while he was talking, I was listening. While he was assuming, I was watching. There is a certain power in being underestimated. It's something you earn slowly, painfully, over decades, until even your own children believe you've gone soft. What they don't see is the clarity that creeps in once you're no longer distracted by ambition or approval. You begin to notice things they assume you won't. Glances exchanged, slips of the tongue, documents left just long enough on the table to be read. One afternoon he stopped by unexpectedly, said he had something to run by me real quick. He sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open, clicking and typing in that impatient way of his. And then he turned the screen toward me. "I've drafted a simplified version," he said. "No rush, just want you to take a look." It was another legal document, this one more polished, more sterile. I scanned the opening lines and saw the words "relinquish title" and "irrevocable authorization." He kept talking as I read, explaining that he'd spoken to a notary who could come by just to get things rolling. I nodded, handed the laptop back. Without a word, and asked if he wanted coffee. He declined, said he had a meeting in 20 minutes, and left with a smile on his face, as if he'd just sealed a deal. The moment the door closed, I sat down at the table and let the silence expand until it filled every room. This wasn't concern. This wasn't love cloaked in efficiency. This was maneuvering. My son, my own blood, was trying to take something from me, not because he needed it, but because he believed I had lost the right to keep it. I called Alan the next day and told him it was time. We met at his office, more a converted sunroom in the back of his house, with file cabinets that smelled of dust and leather. He showed me the paperwork for the living trust he'd prepared, a binding document that placed the house in a protective structure with specific conditions. I retained lifetime residence and control, and no sale or transfer could occur without my explicit consent, even after my death. I added a clause that stated any attempt to coerce, manipulate, or fraudulently obtain control of the property would trigger a legal freeze. Alan nodded as I signed, his mouth pressed into a thin line. "You sure you want to do this, Harold?" he asked. I looked at him. "I'm sure." And I was. Not because I wanted to punish Tom, but because I wanted to reclaim the part of myself I had been slowly convinced to surrender. That night, Tom called again. "Hey, Dad, just checking in. Did you get a chance to look at that doc I sent?" I told him I was still thinking about it, that I'd been a little tired. He softened his tone immediately, the way someone does when they think they're speaking to a fading mind. "That's okay, no rush. I'll swing by this weekend, maybe bring Celeste. We can go through it together, page by page." I said that would be nice. He laughed and said, "You're the best, Dad. Love you." And I hung up without replying. On Saturday, they arrived just after noon. Celeste wore that tight-lipped expression she always had when she was trying to be gracious. Tom came in with his laptop again, confident, already unfolding it on the table like a ritual. "Let's just review this," he said, pulling up the document. We made a few adjustments, simplified the language. I watched them perform the choreography of manipulation, Celeste smiling when she thought I was confused, Tom pausing every few lines to explain things he barely understood himself. I let them talk. I even nodded a few times, made notes in the margin with a dull pencil. Then, very calmly, I pushed the papers aside and said, "Actually, I have something to show you." I got up, went to the drawer, and returned with a single page, a notarized summary of the trust. I slid it across the table. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. Then Tom picked it up and read it quickly, his mouth tightening as he reached the signature line. "What is this?" he asked, though he already knew. "It's the new deed," I said. "The house is no longer in my name. It's in a trust. I control it fully until my death, and after that, it doesn't go to you. It goes to an endowment." Celeste was the first to react. "An endowment?" she said, her voice rising. "You're giving it away? To strangers?" Tom stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "What the hell is this, Dad? You're cutting us out? After everything we've done for you?" I looked at him, and I felt something between sorrow and serenity. "Everything you've done for me?" I asked quietly. "Like trying to trick me into signing away my house? Like assuming I'm too stupid to know what a power of attorney does?" He didn't deny it. He just stood there, fuming, his hands clenched. Celeste reached for his arm, tried to calm him, but he pulled away. "You're senile," he said. "You don't even know what you're doing. This is elder abuse against yourself." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was pathetic. "No, Tom," I said. "What you tried to do is elder abuse. What I'm doing is protecting myself. You made this happen. You showed me who you were, and I believed you." The silence that followed was thick and awkward. They left soon after, Tom muttering that he'd see me in court, Celeste avoiding my gaze. As the door closed behind them, I felt a stillness settle over the house. Not the lonely kind, but the resolute kind. The kind that comes after a storm. For the first time in years, I felt awake, not like an old man waiting for the inevitable, but like someone who had found the will to resist the quiet erasure that so often comes with age. The game had changed. They'd tried to write me out, but I had rewritten the script. They thought I'd go quietly. But I still had a voice, and they were going to hear it. The day the letter arrived was the first time I truly understood just how far Tom was willing to go. I had been pruning the hedges in the front yard, something Dorothy always insisted gave the house a face worth coming home to. When I noticed the envelope sticking out from the mailbox, thick, official-looking, with a return address I didn't recognize, it wasn't from a bank or a friend or a charity. It was from the county court, and my name was printed in full across the front in that cold, mechanical font that always seems to mean bad news. I took it inside, washed the dirt from my hands, and opened it at the kitchen table with the same uneasy care one might use to uncover a wound. The language was clinical, almost brutal in its detachment. A petition for guardianship, citing diminished cognitive faculties, potential self-harm, and inability to manage financial affairs. The petitioner, Thomas Stanley, my son. He had actually done it. He had filed to have me declared legally incompetent. At first I thought I was misunderstanding. I reread the letter twice, then a third time, each pass confirming what I desperately didn't want to believe. My own son had gone to court behind my back and presented a case that I was mentally unfit to care for myself, that I posed a risk to my own well-being, and that, as such, he should be granted full authority over my personal and financial decisions. I had expected pushback after I created the trust, maybe some threats or harsh words. I had not expected a formal assault on my personhood. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about erasing my voice, turning me into a ward of someone who had already decided I was disposable. I sat there at the table for a long time, the sun shifting across the floor in long, creeping shadows, and I remembered when I used to carry Tom on my shoulders through the park, his laughter spilling over me like sunlight, his little hands tangled in my hair. How do you reconcile that boy with the man who would stand in front of a judge and declare you unfit to live? I called Alan immediately. He answered on the first ring, and I didn't even say hello. I just read him the first paragraph of the letter. He listened silently, then said in that steady voice of his, "We'll fight this, Harold, but you have to be ready. He's playing hardball now." That afternoon, I went to his office, and we started gathering everything we needed: medical records, tax filings, witness statements, notarized documents, all the mundane proof of competence that no man should ever have to, compiled just to affirm that he is still human. Alan arranged for an independent psychological assessment, and I sat through it like a man on trial for his own sanity. I answered every question, repeated every pattern, completed every test, not with nervousness, but with rage burning beneath my composure. I wasn't going to give them a single crack to exploit. A week later, I received another envelope, this one from Tom's attorney. Enclosed was a settlement offer, proposing that I voluntarily transfer financial authority to Tom in exchange for a comfortable transition to assisted living and a modest monthly allowance. They framed it as a kindness, a compromise to avoid further legal action. I read the letter once, then shredded it slowly, feeding it through the machine like it was a sacrificial offering to the part of me that used to want reconciliation. I knew now there was no such possibility. The son I loved was gone, and in his place stood a man so obsessed with control and inheritance that he would attempt to legally orphan his own father while he was still breathing. The next hearing was scheduled for the following month. Until then, I lived in a state of quiet readiness, like a soldier in a foxhole, waiting for the next barrage. I still watered the garden, still read my paper, still wrote letters to my late wife, but everything was tinted now with the knowledge that I was being hunted. Every phone call felt suspect. Every knock at the door made my pulse spike. I began to record conversations. I backed up every document. I reviewed the trust paperwork so many times I could recite it from memory. I even created a second will, one that clearly and unequivocally disinherited Tom and anyone acting on his behalf. I gave a copy to Alan and another to a safe deposit box under my sole name. I was methodical, exacting, relentless. I had spent a life building something worth protecting. I wasn't about to let it be dismantled by someone who believed that age equals obsolescence. One evening I got a call from Celeste. Her voice was strained, brittle around the edges. She said Tom wasn't sleeping, that he was worried about me, that maybe we could all sit down and come to an understanding. I asked her very calmly if she had read the court documents he filed. She hesitated, then said quietly, "He just wants what's best for everyone." I thanked her and hung up. There was nothing left to say. That night, I stood on the porch with a cup of tea and looked out at the street where my neighbor's porch lights flickered on, one by one. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt resolved. This was the midpoint. The war had begun. But I was still standing, and I wasn't going anywhere. In the weeks leading up to the court hearing, the nature of the conflict changed in a way I hadn't expected. It stopped being just a legal battle over guardianship and control. It became something more corrosive, more insidious, a psychological campaign designed to grind me down, to isolate me from every fragment of stability I had left. Phone calls from old friends started dwindling, and when I did speak to someone I'd known for years, there was an odd hesitation in their voices, a subtle shift in tone that made it clear something had been said behind my back. One neighbor, a kind widow named June, who used to bring me banana bread on Sundays, stopped waving to me altogether. When I ran into her at the grocery store and asked how she was, she gave a polite but nervous smile and muttered something about being late for a lunch before quickly walking away. I didn't need to guess what was happening. Tom was talking, or more precisely, spinning. It became clear that my son wasn't content with trying to remove my autonomy through legal means. He was trying to build a social case as well, planting the image of a doddering old man whose paranoia and confusion had reached dangerous levels. It wasn't enough for him to win in court. He wanted the world to see him as the caring, responsible son burdened with a father unraveling at the seams. I heard from a church acquaintance that Tom had spoken with the pastor, framing the situation as a heartbreaking decline and asking for prayers. I heard from an old colleague that Tom had stopped by the office where I used to volunteer, gently suggesting I might not be up for community responsibilities anymore. It was a slow erosion of credibility, engineered to disarm any support I might have had left. And yet I refused to flinch. I kept every receipt, recorded every suspicious conversation, and continued attending my appointments with an alertness so precise it frightened even me. When the court-appointed psychologist came to evaluate me, I offered him coffee, walked him through my home, and handed him a binder of documents that detailed the timeline of Tom's efforts, complete with annotations, emails, and legal advisories from Alan. The man blinked at the thoroughness. "Most people don't prepare like this," he said, scribbling notes as he spoke. I smiled without humor and replied, "Most people aren't being hunted by their own children." The look on his face told me he understood. Then came the most brazen act of all. One evening, I returned home from the grocery store to find the lock on my front door tampered with. It wasn't broken or forced, nothing that obvious, but the key didn't fit the way it used to. I had to jiggle it, force it, twist with more strength than usual. When I finally got inside, I noticed subtle differences. A chair moved, a cabinet slightly ajar, the drawer where I kept my checkbook opened by half an inch. No obvious theft, no vandalism, just enough to suggest that someone had been there. I checked every room, every closet, every corner. Nothing was gone, but something had been disturbed. The air in the house was wrong, like a breath held too long. I called Alan immediately. "Change the locks," he said. "Now, don't wait." I did that night, hiring an emergency locksmith who arrived at 11 and worked until 1 in the morning. While he drilled and refitted, I sat by the door with a baseball bat, feeling like a man who had just narrowly escaped being buried alive. The next morning, Alan called with news. "There's a development," he said. "Tom filed a supplementary petition claiming you've been seen wandering the streets at night in your bathrobe, muttering to yourself." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the phone. "Do we have proof of that?" I asked. "A police report, a witness statement?" Alan sighed. "No, but it's been submitted to the court as supporting testimony. It's hearsay, but damaging if believed." My smile faded. I realized then that Tom didn't need to prove anything definitively. He just needed to raise enough doubt, make the question seem credible, plant the seed, let it grow. I didn't leave the house for the next few days, not out of fear, but out of strategy. I documented everything. I wrote daily journals. I recorded voice memos. I placed a motion-activated camera in the hallway in case someone tried to enter again. And when the day of the hearing came, I walked into the courthouse not as a frail old man, but as someone prepared to fight for his identity with every ounce of strength he had left. The courtroom was sterile, with beige walls and flickering fluorescents that gave everyone a sickly pallor. Tom was already seated, flanked by his lawyer and Celeste, both dressed like they were attending a corporate presentation. I nodded at him when I entered. He didn't nod back. The proceedings began with the judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a clipped voice, asking both sides to present their positions. Tom's lawyer went first, painting a portrait of a concerned son watching his father decline rapidly. Stories of forgotten stove burners, misplaced medication, rambling phone calls, and late-night wanderings. Mr. Stanley has become increasingly erratic, the attorney said, voice smooth and solemn. This petition is not about control, it's about safety. Then he sat down, visibly pleased with his performance. Alan stood and responded with precision, presenting medical records from the last year, psychological evaluations, notarized letters from 2 physicians, and a testimony from my financial advisor, who confirmed that I managed my own affairs competently. Then finally the judge turned to me. I stood up, slow but steady, and cleared my throat. Your Honor, I said, my son believes that age is a diagnosis, that getting old means surrendering choice. But age is not incompetence. Age is accumulation of knowledge, of caution, of memory. Yes, I forget things. So do young people. Yes, I move slowly. So does anyone with enough time behind them. But I am not broken. I am not a ward. I am a man who has lived, who has worked, who has loved, and I will not be dismissed while I am still standing. The room was silent. Even Tom looked momentarily stunned. The judge asked a few questions. I answered clearly, confidently. I knew the date, the president, the value of my assets, and the details of my estate. I referenced the trust, cited the deed transfer, and even quoted one of Tom's own emails. When it was over, the judge said she would take the matter under advisement and issue a decision within a week. I thanked her, gathered my papers, and left the courtroom without looking back. 2 days later, the court ruled in my favor. The petition was denied, citing insufficient evidence of cognitive decline and clear documentation of independent function. Tom was ordered to cease all attempts to act as guardian without further court approval. It was a victory, yes, but it felt more like an armistice than peace, because I knew deep down that Tom wasn't done. People like him don't stop, they regroup. And I, an old man maybe but not yet defeated, began preparing for the next strike, because if he came for me again, it would be war. And this time, I'd take everything. The house, the money, the name, and the last illusion that family, by blood alone, entitles anyone to ownership of another man's life. After the court's decision, I thought there might be a moment of silence, a brief lull in which Tom would retreat, lick his wounds, perhaps even reflect on the magnitude of what he had tried to do. I was wrong. The silence that followed was not an end, but a recalibration. And I knew that if I waited for him to come again, it would be with more cunning, more desperation, and fewer traces of shame. So I didn't wait. I struck first. I reached out to a real estate firm through Alan's contact, a woman named Marlene Page, who had been in the business for over 30 years and had seen her share of family wars disguised as property sales. She met me with a firm handshake, sharp eyes, and a quiet understanding that needed no explanation. We don't just sell houses, she said. We close chapters, and we open new ones. I handed her the trust documentation and told her I wanted to initiate the process to liquidate my share. Or the whole property, if possible. I added, even if they don't consent. She looked over the deed, nodded slowly, and said, they may scream, but they can't stop you. Within a week, the property had been formally appraised and a listing prepared, though for legal reasons it required formal notification to the other co-owners, Tom and Celeste. The notice was sent via certified mail, as required. I knew what would come next. Rage, accusations, calls I wouldn't answer. But I had waited long enough. I had spent years trying to be patient, generous, forgiving. I had opened my door to a son who saw me as nothing more than a future estate. I had signed checks when I should have asked questions. Now, all that remained was to act. On the 3rd day after the letter was delivered, Tom showed up at my front door, unannounced. I watched him through the glass for several minutes before I opened it. His face was flushed, his hands trembling, not with grief or sadness, but fury. "What the hell is this?" he said, holding the letter in one hand, crumpled and sweat-stained. "You're trying to sell the house? You want to force a sale?" I said nothing for a moment, then calmly replied, "It's my house too, a third of it at least. You told me I was too old to own anything. I'm simply proving you wrong." He looked at me like he didn't recognize the man standing in front of him. "This is insane. You'll destroy everything. Breeze College Fund, our mortgage. You want to humiliate us?" I shook my head. "No, Tom. I want to end the illusion that you've earned any of it. That house was bought with my money, my name on the loan, and promises you never intended to keep. I waited years for you to treat me like family. Now I'll settle for you treating me like a legal equal." He stepped forward, invading the threshold. "You don't know what you're doing," he hissed. "You'll regret this." I stepped back, not in fear but in disgust. "I regret trusting you. That's the only thing I regret." Then I closed the door slowly, gently, not with the force of anger, but the finality of a man who no longer considered what stood outside to be his concern. The next day his lawyer called Marlene, trying to threaten, then delay, then plead. She referred him to the documents, the trust, the court's ruling. 2 weeks later, they still hadn't responded with consent, so Marlene initiated legal proceedings for a forced partition and sale. I knew it would take time, but that time was mine now. In the meantime, I moved forward with another step in the plan I'd quietly nurtured for months. I petitioned the DMV for ownership transfer of the red SUV Tom had parked in my garage for over a year and hadn't moved. On paper, I was still co-owner. In practice, it was abandoned property on my land. After filing the right forms and waiting out the 30-day period, the car was legally mine. I sold it to a used dealer for a fair price and deposited the check into my personal account. The total was almost $40,000. Not bad for something Tom had probably forgotten even existed. A week later, I walked into the bank and formally closed the joint account Tom and I had opened years ago, originally set up to cover emergencies and now long misused by him to siphon money with quiet entitlement. The account held $27,000, all accumulated from deposits I had made month after month without a single thank you. I transferred the entire balance to my private account and signed the necessary forms. The banker looked at me and said, "Mr. Stanley, are you sure you want to do this? Once it's closed, you can't reopen it." I looked her in the eye and said, "That chapter's already closed. Now I'm just making it official." But the true climax came when Marlene called me to say she had found a buyer for the house, an eager one, who offered above the estimated market value, and who was willing to proceed even with the petition lawsuit, still pending. "They want to close within 45 days. She said, "We can push forward unless your son files an injunction." I told her to proceed. The next day, Tom's lawyer tried exactly that, filing a last-minute claim that I was mentally unfit to sell property. It was a desperate echo of the guardianship petition, already ruled on and dismissed. Marlene sent the judge the previous ruling, the psychological evaluations, and a transcript from the earlier hearing. The judge denied the injunction within hours, and that was the moment it all broke open. Tom called me. For the first time in weeks, his voice wasn't angry, it was desperate. "Dad, please," he said. "We can fix this. Just stop the sale. Give us a chance. Don't ruin everything." I listened, silent. Then I asked, "What exactly am I ruining, Tom? The house you tried to steal? The life you tried to erase? You're lucky I'm only taking what's mine, because if I took what I deserved, there'd be nothing left for you." The line went quiet, and then he said, "You're going to die alone, you know. You'll sit in that house and rot, and no one will come." I almost smiled. "That's what you never understood," I replied. "I've been alone since the day your mother died. You just made it real." I hung up, walked to the kitchen, poured myself a cup of tea, and sat by the window. Outside, the evening light spilled over the street, warm and golden. I had done what needed to be done. I had stood up when they expected me to fold. And now, no matter what came next, I would face it on my terms. Because they had tried to write me off, tried to bury me alive under a mountain of paperwork and polite lies. But I had dug myself out. I had reclaimed my name, my property, my voice. And if that made me the villain in their story, so be it. I would rather be the villain with dignity than the father who was quietly erased. The house would sell. The money would be mine. And Tom would learn that age may dull the body, but it sharpens the soul, and I, Harold Stanley, was not done yet. The house sold in late spring, during one of those strange weeks when Pittsburgh forgets it's a grey city, and the sun spreads itself wide across every roof and window pane like a second chance. Marlene called to confirm the transfer had gone through, and the funds were safely in my account. I thanked her, not with the exhilaration she might have expected, but with the quiet gratitude of a man who has finally turned the last page of a long, painful chapter. The new owners, a retired couple from upstate New York, sent a letter thanking me for keeping the soul of the house alive. I didn't reply. The house didn't belong to me anymore, and neither did the memories inside it. I had taken what I could carry, and the rest I left behind like shed skin. I moved into a modest apartment on the other side of town. Nothing grand, just 2 rooms, a balcony, and a quiet view of the park. I filled it with only what mattered: a few photos of Dorothy, my books, the old wooden clock she loved, and the letter my grandson Austin had once left under my pillow when he was 10, written in crooked letters that said, "You're the strongest man No. That paper, worn and folded 100 times, still lives in the drawer of my nightstand. I haven't spoken to Austin or Bree since the final fallout with Tom, though I've heard through whispers that Bree asked her mother if she could write to me and was told no. That hurt, more than I expected, but I've learned that pain, at my age, is like weather. You can't stop it, but you learn which coats to wear. Tom hasn't contacted me since the sale closed. No letters, no phone calls, not even the performative outrage I thought might follow. It's as if I've been cut from the family ledger, a name no longer spoken aloud. And strangely, that silence, once terrifying, now feels like relief. When people ask, I say my son lives in another state. Which is true in every sense that matters. I sometimes wonder if he regrets it, if late at night he hears my voice in the corners of his conscience. But then I remember the cold efficiency of his actions, the calm he maintained while trying to reduce my life to a transaction, and I know there is no regret in him, only hunger. You don't negotiate with hunger, you starve it. With the proceeds from the house, I did something unexpected. I created a small private foundation in Dorothy's name, the Dorothy Stanley Shelter Trust, meant to support elderly individuals at risk of homelessness due to family neglect or financial manipulation. Alan helped me with the paperwork, and we funded the first 5 grant recipients within a month. The stories they sent me, of children who emptied savings accounts, of nursing homes forced upon them without warning, of lives reduced to storage bins and hospital beds, confirmed what I had feared. My story wasn't unique, but it didn't have to end the same way. In every letter I wrote them, I ended with the same words: "You are still the owner of your name." I spend my days simply now. I wake up early, drink coffee on the balcony, and watch the world forget me slowly, gently. And yet, There's a peace in that forgetting. No one asks me to sign away my future. No one measures my worth in square footage or utility bills. I am not visited out of obligation or spoken to like a burden. I am alone, yes, but it is the aloneness of a man who has chosen solitude over performance. Sometimes, in the evenings, I sit with the letter Austen wrote and whisper the words aloud, letting them hang in the air like a prayer. You're the strongest man I know. And I believe them, not because I won in court or outmaneuvered my son, but because I remembered, when it mattered most, that strength isn't noise. It's refusal. Refusal to disappear quietly. I don't know what will happen when I die. I've written my wishes plainly. No funeral. No eulogies from people who forgot me when I still breathed. My ashes will be scattered in the garden of a shelter I helped build. That will be enough. I've made peace with the story. I've carved my name back into the world, and if, one day, Austen or Bree finds their way to the truth, if they ever read what really happened, I hope they understand not the war, but the reason for it. I hope they know I didn't fight to win. I fought to stay. Because no one, not even your own child, has the right to erase you before you're gone.